Welcome back to the RGR Craft Beer Podcast about beer and brewing. I am Ryan, your host, as well as a traveler along the road of brewing and beer in general. There's a ton to talk about, and if you missed our last episode, my new co-host, a guy that will be on here sporadically for now, but eventually will be a stalwart, Mike is going to be joining me again next time, but for today, I'm going to start with what's going to be a series on how to go about and the things that you can take away from the Great American Beer Fest. It's something that we do every year that people make pilgrimages from all over the world to go to, and it happens to be really, really close to where I live. So it's a stalwart in my year. It's something that I do quite often, and Mike and I do together. And I want to start just before I get any of the minutia out about what you can expect there, how to go about it, and what it really is to most beer drinkers, let alone the brewers. I want to give a shout out to a couple of organizations, some friends of mine. I want to start with Casey Bloyer, a friend you may have heard me talk football with in the past, and Launchpad Brewing, who he is a key piece of. And I want to congratulate them on their bronze medal in 2019 for Peacekeeper, their session beer. A great beer to drink, and really like to see them starting to have success. They've launched a ton of new programs, barrel aging programs, and they're really making headway. Launchpad is a name to keep an eye on. And then I would be remiss if we didn't circle back to Scott Witzo and Tim Meyer over at Strange and Wits End Brewing. They are a unique setup where the two breweries actually cohabitate. There's one head brewer in Tyler Beast that brews all of the beer for both breweries in one setup. They are a great story and friends to both Mike and I. And really congratulate them on their Lindauer Lager. They got the silver in the Dortmunder, the German style, category 46 at GABF this year. Another huge accomplishment for what's been a really interesting business model that I'm sure we will talk about in the future and hopefully get them to come on and tell us a little bit more about. And then finally, I want to give a shout out to the folks over at Whidbey Brewing who have come back from a medal in 2017 and have really been putting out some very, very tasty beers. Going to see a lot coming out of them in the near future. So check out Whidbey, Wibby, when you have a chance, especially if it's distributed where you're at. That brings us to what GABF is all about. And it really is getting the industry, anybody in the industry that cares to enter the beer can enter their beer into the competition for a world-renowned panel of judges to take a look at. And it is kind of the industry standard about being an elite brewer that you do medal. A good friend of mine, another close friend of mine, Adam, up at Inventors Brewing in Wisconsin, has had a long and storied history with his Chai Stout winning medals at GABF. It has allowed him to bounce around the country from really great setup here in Colorado, now his own brewery in Wisconsin in what is becoming a very interesting market up there. And it's one of those things that it is something you carry with you. Medals at GABF stand the test of time and are a signal to the beer community and really the entire Cicerone community anywhere about what kind of work you do and what kind of product you produce. It is, for all intents and purposes, a badge of honor. And the great thing that that does, not for the brewers just to be recognized universally amongst themselves, but what it does for the beer drinking public is give you a selection of beer to try, to taste, and get to know at GABF that is beyond anything that you are going to get outside of World Beer Cup, and I'd argue is probably more diverse. So it is an event for beer nerds around the country to make the pilgrimage for and to get into Denver to be a part of it. I'm going to show you some clips. I'm sure we'll have some takeaways over here as we go through. Now, this is something that Mike and I do most years pretty consistently. This is the first year that I covered it as media, and that was a little bit eye-opening for me. How things change when you first tap a keg, and then what you actually get later when you're in one of the public sessions, especially the homebrewer session that is what I usually go through. Perceptions do change. You have a cleaner palate. I found I had a cleaner palate when the event started. After 3 or 4 sessions, it became a little bit muddy, to tell you the truth. But at the end of the day, I got to drink a lot of great tasting beer in sparse quantities, unfortunately. Meet a lot of interesting vendors with some interesting equipment that are coming in this next year, some things that I'm going to have for you and my reviews. And really was just a great event. I go with friends sometimes. I go with a lot of home brewers. And now with this perspective, hanging out with more of the brewers themselves, it changes things. And it makes it a little bit difficult to navigate. It is a huge event. It is something that, if you're a first-timer, I'm sure is overwhelming. But even if you are someone who's been a number of times, it's still a lot of ground to cover. And that's why I encourage anyone who is looking to go for the first time, or has maybe been and found themselves not having covered as much ground as they would have liked to. When you think about all the categories that are available, it is very difficult to do that in a single session of 4 hours. So that becomes problematic. But I will tell you this. The thing that the Great American Beer Fest does very, very well is set you up with information beforehand. So I will always encourage anyone who chooses to go to the fest to actually do their homework ahead of time. You're going to get a list of the beers entered. You're going to get a map available on their website. They even have their own application that you can download. It helps you not only find the beers and navigate the convention center, but it also allows you to rate beer as you drink it, to take notes on those beers as you taste them if you choose. That gets a little problematic when you're trying to get what is always a really, really long list for me to get them in. So sometimes that's troublesome, but it is a great feature to have. And by doing that, it allows you to focus on the things that you really want to get in and see and taste. And there is quite a bit. You know, for me, there's always specific categories that have to be taken care of. And it's not the BJCP exactly. There are a lot of categories for GABF that don't have a one-to-one match, but they all are related. And I find that really, for me, I'm not a huge Pilsner guy. I don't go just for Pilsners. There are a lot of people that do, especially if you happen to be a brewer yourselves. The phenomenon of brewers being specifically interested in lager, because it's a difficult thing to master, because there isn't a whole lot of room to hide behind in terms of your flavors, your technique to make sure that you don't get off flavors, and how you build the grist and the hop ratios. It's a really interesting thing to see that when brewers want to know how good somebody is, they drink lighter beers, because it is just that much easier to get a feel for how well somebody brews and how they go about it. So while that's not high on my list, it definitely is for a lot of people. And I will say the first category that always comes to mind for me is barley wine, because that is the style that I make the most. It is the style that I look for the most. And it is a difficult, of all the bigger beers, it is a very difficult one to master. It's tough to get that right, because while it is a bigger, medium dark beer generally, there are a lot of things going on. You have to layer flavors in there, both in the grist and in the hop profile. It's very, very difficult to get something that comes out both balanced and yet interesting. So when I look at the three winners from this year, and I'll run them down here in a second, I really thought that this was a very diverse group of three medalists within one category. And that's category 107, just for those that are keeping track at home. And for that category, it started with the gold going to Old Diablo from Morgan Territory out in Tracy, California. I have a soft spot for a town named after me. But a nice, well-rounded beer that I did enjoy, but didn't quite hit the spot for me. And then there was Freebooter Barley Wine from Coronado Brewing. A lot of you guys are probably familiar with some of their IPAs, but they do make a fairly heavy barley wine that does have a plentiful amount of hops in it, which I enjoyed. But again, though they got the silver in the competition, it wasn't at the top of my list. I actually preferred the bronze, and that is Three Reisman from Reuben's Brews in Seattle. And that is a beer that takes normal barley wine, or what in America is always sometimes blurs the lines between barley wine and American strongs. Those are all dependent on the hop content, as far as I'm concerned. But Three Reisman is definitely bending the rules on barley wine. Heavy malt background, which I really enjoy, but that rye came through more so than any rye beer that I've had outside of something like a rye PA that's meant to be lighter on the palate. This was a heavy dose of really well-crafted, well-balanced grist with hops that weren't dominant. I would say it's still heavier on the malt than it is on the hop content, but it complemented the rye very well. And I'm a sucker for rye beers in general. This is the best rye barley wine I've ever had. And I think it's definitely something. They are in distribution. I know if you don't get Reuben's Brews locally, you can get them through Tavour. And I hope to have a deal for you guys soon so that you can order some of that. It is shipped to your home. And that way you can get some of these nationally renowned beers delivered to you so you can try some of them for yourself. So that said, my big takeaway for the Barley Wine category at 107, my favorite category, was 3 Reisman from Reuben's Brews. And I hope that they enter that one again. I would love to get another shot. I have 1 bomber sitting in my fridge, and it's going to remain there for quite a while. Now, that said, that's not the only good beer that I drank there, and there are a number of standouts that I'm going to give you guys a couple more examples. And for those of you that are in Florida, I really want to give a hand out to Tank Brewing. Down in Miami, something that I had not had beer from them before this year's GABF. And I do get some Floridian beer. I have friends down there that do have a tendency to send me a care package from time to time. And there are a number of good breweries down there, but I hadn't had anything from Tank before. So I came in really fresh and open-eyed. And I have to say, there were 2 variants of their Duplicity Wild Ale, which really was a Saison more to me with a little bit of Brett. I know they call it a wild ale, somewhere between a Bière de Garde and a true Saison. It definitely, my favorite was the straight Duplicity. And that was a unique beer with very bright, great Belgian flavor, and something that I was quite surprised to find. That is my number 3 rated beer of the entire festival. And I wanted to give them a shout out. Hopefully the pictures come through and I can throw these up there for you guys. So if you're down that way, they aren't distributed outside of Florida. So I don't think you're going to get your hands on it unless you're down in Florida. But for those of you that are, please drop a comment and let us know what you think of that one. Really great beer. I believe it's tap room. I don't think that it's canned or bottled yet, but give us an update if you guys can find it out there. I'd love to know. And while we're talking about Saison, I want to come back around to category 23. What is generally a Saison category, but technically is called American Belgio style ale, meaning Belgian American hybrids. And this sometimes gets a little bit funky. The winner this year was Wittingen out of Austin, Texas. But your silver medalist was something familiar to probably the majority of the listeners here. It's Tank 7 out of Boulevard in Kansas City, Missouri. A great beer, one that is one of my go-tos. And I really just want to emphasize how great it is to have a brewery of that caliber in town, in Kansas City. And I know a lot of the listeners are from there. That is really a nice luxury to have, and a lot of experimentation. That's the beer that I think is really driving that brewery forward right now. A lot of experimentation going on at Boulevard, and I'm here to see it, to tell you the truth. And I want to cover one more beer that is the top of my list before we get into the arguments next week that I know Mike and I will have about GABF champions, et cetera, et cetera. And this one did not medal this year, but it is at the top of my list in terms of beer that I drank this year at GABF 2019. And that's from Revolution in Chicago, a great brewery, one of the leaders in thinking outside the box, moving that city forward in terms of a beer town. Gotten a lot of positive reviews over the last couple of years. And their IPA Antihero is incredible. One of my favorites. It lends itself towards the classic West Coast style, definitely in its hop bill. I wouldn't say that it's a crystal clear all the time. What I had at GBF was pretty clean, pretty bright, but I don't know I've had it in cans before. I want to say in 17 that were not so much. So it's not the hazy IPA that has become the rage in America, and I'm okay with that. Not exactly a style that I am super big on, the hazy IPA trend. But for this one, classic blend, Citra on top of Crystal, Centennial, and Chinook. Really deep bitterness, kind of that comes from that West Coast flavor, and something that I really dug. It is at the top of my ratings from GABF, and I do keep a track when I go. If something stands out to me, I definitely make note of it and leave it on the list so that I can find it again. That's something that I just do out of habit. There are a number of others that score very highly, and I want to shout a couple of them out. Some strange and some, not really out there. One was an apple brandy barrel-aged beer called Muy Bonita from Funky Buddha, a brewery that I enjoy when I get a chance to get it. And that beer in particular hit the spot this year. I'm going to have to talk to Mike about that one. I think he had a different take on it. We'll get with that next time. And for my brewery of the year at GBF, they had 2 of my top 10 beers. And that is Fremont Brewing from Seattle. Both Rusty Nail and their Dark Star, which is the coffee edition of their barrel-aged bourbon. Bourbon barrel-aged stout. A beautiful beer, one that I've had variations of over the years. And this just really hit the top of the list in terms of the additions that they've done of late. Really impressed with the coffee version of this one that they brought to this year's. And Rusty Nail is always a classic. You get that cinnamon in it that really hits the spot for me. And I love those around this time of year. Darker beers come in for me for December and January, and that's kind of a celebration. I try to keep it lighter the rest of the year. And we talked a little bit about that last time, about the seasonality of beers. And it goes into how breweries approach the way that they stagger their brews and when they make them. If you guys caught the Anchor episode from a few weeks ago, you know that they started brewing Christmas beer in July. So it takes a little bit of planning. And that part of the brewer business is something that I always find very intriguing. And I'm always pretty in awe because the amount of pre-planning for what is really an artisan craft, it very much impresses me. Casey out there at Launchpad is telling me about that quite a bit. The planning that it takes to do releases of a brewery like Launchpad's stature is very much a full-time job, and I commend them for doing it. It's another brewery that I hope to do more in depth for you guys on. They are an up-and-coming, catching fire pretty quickly here in Colorado. And Colorado's got a lot of great breweries, but there's always growing. We're going to talk a little bit about the business of brewing in the modern era in America here, in particular here on the next show or two, depending on how deep we get into it. But I want to leave you with what are a few takeaways about how to go about what works best so that you can get done what you want to get done. First of all, there is always a tent or an area at GABF where you can get last year's winners. They will bring not the same beer. I don't think I've ever seen the same beer from a year earlier. They don't age well, so that's not something that you're going to get. But for those of you that hear about these beers today and you're considering of coming to Denver in October of 2020 to go to GABF next year, there will be an area in the convention center where you can get all of the award-winning beers. All of the medalists will be available. That's someplace that I always go, and I shouldn't say all because that's not actually true. A large amount of them. They're not all of them there. It depends on the brewery themselves. There's always situations where they don't happen, but there's a section where you can get medalist-only beers, and that's something that to tuck away this episode and probably the next one after we talk with Mike as well, to try and establish what you've heard and how your taste buds are. If you don't get a chance to have any of these in the next 12 months, there's always that option. The other thing that I really enjoy, and we'll talk about this in coming episodes as well, is a lot of vendors were there. I made a couple of connections that I think you guys are going to enjoy as we get deeper and deeper into topics on the homebrew side, but also that there are more and more that homebrew into the pro brewing is starting to have its line blurred. Very intriguing as the number of entries into the ProAms begin to come along. And that's another section that you can get to at GABF, which is either through a contest or some kind of collaboration or something or other. You get ProAms that are a professional brewery making a recipe developed, worked with, and in conjunction with an amateur homebrewer. And that's quite interesting to see, too. A little bit more innovation comes from that, and I think that's really worth going after. And as far as this year's festival itself went, I was glad to see that they rearranged things again. It had been a number of changes over the years, but you can generally find breweries together by regionality, and I think that's great. And it does go back to what we started the show with, and I want to end with this as well, that if you're considering going to GABF, I strongly suggest that you map out what you want to do. And if you are somebody that has a specific style, if you're there for the Helles lagers, or you're looking specifically for session IPAs, or you have something in particular, get them together because the convention center is quite big and it does take some time to move around depending on the session that you're in. There are a number of people that grows exponentially as the weekend goes on. And I feel like it gets harder and harder to move around. So it depends on the session that you're into. But if you know where you're going and you have a concept before you get there, it's much easier to make sure that you hit all the things that you want to taste. And especially if you're somebody that's traveling from out of town, I really suggest that you make your arrangements that way and you get the most out of it. I have done that pretty much every year since I began, after my first one, where I was just running with my head cut off, basically, because I didn't know where I was going or what I was doing, or honestly, what I wanted to make sure that I got to. So that's my 2 bits. I hope you guys enjoyed this. We'll be back next week with more from me and Mike. Really appreciate your time. If you like this, do 2 things. Hit the thumbs up for me, because that helps us get the show out to more people, and hit the sub button for you so that you get more of the shows. You'll get notifications. You can click that bell to make sure that you get notified when you can click that bell to find out when a new show goes up, and you'll get a notification. Particularly in mobile, you want to make sure that you hit the drop down and make sure you have all notifications. And if you like this one, leave your comment too. Love to know what you guys think about some of these regional beers, and I'm looking forward to more suggestions. So cheers to you, beer fans. Thanks for listening, and we'll check you next time.